What's up, everyone? Kevin here from Skywatcher. Welcome to another episode of the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. We cover everything from what's up in the sky to helpful tips and tricks. And, of course, at the end of the month, we have a special guest to talk about their specialty in the field of astronomy. So today we are talking about image circles. If you're not familiar with that, you will be by the time this episode is actually done. This is a astrophotography episode, so if you don't know what an image circle is and you're not an imager, that would be a good start. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It lets us know we're doing a good job. Leave a like on a video, and then you can also email us at info@skywatchusa.com and title it What's Up, and we can get ideas for future episodes. But we always appreciate you guys watching. It's always fun to hang out with you guys on Friday, and then seeing you guys in person is always fun as well. If you want to stay up with what's going on at Skywatcher, head over to skywatchusa.com, hit subscribe and save up at the top. And then, of course, you can always head over to our skywatcher.threadless.com store if you want to pick up some cool Skywatcher swag. We've always got cool stuff going on there. And then, of course, you can always head over to skywatchusa.com and pick up your favorite thing that you've been looking for. All right, let's dive right into this. So, image circles. Like I said, this is an astrophotography topic, but what is it? If you're new to astrophotography, maybe you're looking to get pretty serious into this, an image circle is something that you're really gonna want to pay attention to, because it's kind of the framework of what your system is going to be able to handle as far as cameras go and what cameras can be utilized with your scope. So what is an image circle? An image circle is the circle an optic produces on the imaging plane. So, you know, when light goes through a lens or a telescope or whatever you're using for photography, it produces a circular image. It projects it. And either that is caught by an eyepiece, and then that's brought up to the eye so we can see, or it's projected onto a camera. Now, that circle is kind of the framework of basically telling you how big of a sensor you could put on the back of the telescope. And we need to know that. So when you're purchasing a camera, or maybe you've got a really nice camera setup and you want to change the optics a bit, we need to make sure that whatever we're purchasing is going to match up with the stuff we've already got. Or allows us to achieve the goal that we're trying to achieve. But yeah, it's basically the circle of light that is projected from either, it could be a camera lens, it could be a telescope, it doesn't matter. This is something you can apply to any type of photographic hobby. It all comes down to what the lens is actually producing. So now, on the market nowadays, obviously astrophotography is a huge part of the hobby, and it's growing rapidly. Let me get a focal reducer here. But it's growing rapidly, for even more than it already has. It's become quite popular. And a lot of telescopes on the market nowadays are designed for astrophotography. Of course, you can do visual with a lot of these as well. But if you go looking through the specs when you're looking to buy a telescope, let me see if I can actually just pull one up here real quick. Use our website. You can go over, we'll just talk about, come on. There we go. So let's say you're looking for a telescope and you want to do astrophotography with it. Any major manufacturer should list this specification somewhere on the website or somewhere in their specifications for this, especially if it's an astrophotography telescope. So let's just pick the Esprit 100. Of course, it's got all the fun details in there. You can go to specifications. If you cruise through, you should have all the stuff you want to know. There's your aperture, there's your f ratio, there's your focal length, all that fun stuff you need to know. And do we even have it listed here? This is a bad example. Anyway, we're redoing some stuff anyway, but why don't we have this listed? Bad on us. Or is it hiding somewhere else? We have it on our... It's in the manual, though. Let's see. So somewhere within the documentation of a telescope, whether it's the website, better yet, go to the manual for that particular telescope, because an image circle is going to change. It's unique for each optic. So let's just pick the Esprit 100. You go into the manual. Somewhere in the specs here, usually down where we start talking to imaging, it should list what your illuminated field and back focus and all of that actually is. Back focus. It's going to drive me nuts if this isn't listed in here, and I don't think it is. Anyway. Oh, there it is right there. Fully illuminated field with flattener right down there in the specs. 40 millimeter. So somewhere in whatever the telescope that you're looking at, somewhere in the documentation, whether it's on their website, which we should have it on there, we'll have to redo it, or in the technical specifications in the manual, it should tell you what the illuminated field is. So for the Esprit 100, that's 40 millimeters. Now, if you're looking at any astrophotography telescope, it's going to be listed somewhere. So that's what you want to work with when you're trying to figure this out. Especially, let's say you already have a camera, or maybe you're looking to upgrade your camera in the future, and you know it's like, hey, I'm going to want a big chip. Can my telescope or my future telescope that I'm trying to obtain work with what I'm trying to put together? And that image circle is what you want to find, because that will tell you how big of a sensor you can actually work with. So now that we did that, sorry that took way too long. So large image circles allow for bigger chips, smaller chips. So pretty straightforward with all of that. But the image circle is what ultimately dictates the size of the sensor that can be used on that optic, be it a camera lens or a telescope. It's all the same. Now, you don't have to use the whole image circle of that lens. Now, this kind of comes up, and I think it's really dumb how it's stated in photography. So in regular photography, you have any kind of camera lens, you know, like this Canon 1635. You have these lenses here, and they produce an image circle, usually large enough to handle a full frame camera. Well, some people will talk about the crop factor, where if you put a smaller lens, a smaller sensor on there, that you're effectively getting more zoom. You're not getting any of that. It's effectively making it act like you're getting more zoom because it's cropped. That's all that's going on. The optics don't magically change and give you this crop factor, which gives you more magnification. If a lens is whatever the focal length of the lens is, that is what it is. It's glass. It is ground into those curves. That's the focal length. Nothing changes. What you are basically doing by putting a crop sensor on a full frame lens is you're just not utilizing the entire image circle. And somewhere along the way, they came up with this really, in my opinion, stupid approach that, oh, by not doing so, this actually acts like this. Okay, or you could just say, I'm not using all of the illuminated field. That's it. It's all about real estate. If you have an image circle and you have a chip big enough to take up the whole real estate, great. If you don't, then you just don't take up the whole image circle. That's it. That's all that's going on with it. But in daytime photography, we made up crop factor, and it's this and it's that. You're just not taking up the whole circle. That's it. Move on. Congratulations. Have a great day. Short, sweet, to the point. Sorry, photographers, but I think the crop factor thing is just crap. And it's confusing. So let's dig into this a little bit further. Basically, what we're trying to do is fit a square peg in a round hole. That is exactly what we're doing with an image circle. So on the back of your camera, on the back of your telescope, whatever, when all that light goes through the optics and it's getting to the focus point, whether that's a lens or an eyepiece is irrelevant right now, but it produces a circle that has a diameter. And that's all we're doing is we're measuring the diameter of that image when it's at the focus point. And like I said, usually listed in the specs. But it's important to know this information so you're prepared before you dump a ton of money in there. You know exactly which pieces are going to work with which one. Larger sensors, which are becoming more and more common nowadays, or this resurgence of building the guider back, or building the guider into the camera, which if I know there's a lot of new people in astrophotography. ZWO makes their duo cameras where you've got the guider built in and you've got the camera sensor. It's a very cool thing to do. It's actually nothing new. SBIG did that in the early 2000s. The patent must have expired. But yeah, so let's see. What about pixel size on smaller sensors? 3.76 versus 2.9. We can get into pixel size if you guys want. Let me get to that in a bit. So I'm not sure where I was, but anyway, larger sensors need a bigger circle, obviously. But larger illuminated fields can be difficult to do. Remember, this is glass. We have to make a telescope with the goal of illuminating X size sensor. And full frame and these big APS-C crop sensors, they're becoming more and more in demand, and they're becoming more and more available price-wise. So we used to work with these really tiny sensors, and it was super expensive. It was like $10,000 to have a big full-frame sensor. Well, now it's like half that price, and it's just dropping all the time. So the demand for telescopes to be able to support bigger and bigger sensors is becoming more and more abundant. So as a manufacturer, we need to look at this and make sure our telescopes are somewhat future-proof to be able to accommodate the growing need for larger sensors. But it's difficult to do this on smaller telescopes because that light cone is only so big because the lens is only so big. And it costs a lot of money to be able to make something like that and do it well. You're trying to correct a very large field, and everyone wants faster and faster optics as well. So there's a lot of compromises and a lot of things that really have to happen in order for us to do this effectively. So before you dump a ton of money into a system or a ton of money into a new scope or camera, figure out what thing is not going to change. I already have a really nice ZWO 2600. Okay, you need to work with a telescope that will produce a field that will illuminate that sensor. That's not super challenging for that size nowadays. But if you're like, hey, I have a full frame sensor, or even worse, bigger, it goes downhill pretty quick. Especially when you're going over full frame. There are telescopes that can handle that, but the price goes up and the offerings go down as well. Let's see. What about pixel size on smaller sensors? 3.76 full frame versus 2.9 APS or 1 inch. So pixel size is important. It really doesn't matter for the topic we're talking about today. Pixel size is basically the resolution of the sensor. So let me get this going here. It is an important factor, and it's important that you match the pixels to your focal length of your optic. I don't know. I think we've done an episode on this, matching camera sensors to telescopes. I don't know if we can dig that up and throw it in the chat, but I think that already exists. It's a little off topic, but we got a little bit of time. So I'm going to use astronomy.tools, and we're just going to pick a target. I don't know. I like picking wide field stuff. So let's see. Well, let's pick something that's like, we'll do an Esprit 120. That's a pretty middle of the road thing, about 840 millimeters. So if you crop, but with smaller pixels in terms of relative, it seems like you're getting I see what we're talking about. Pixel density, and crop factor. Yeah. I mean, you can start to get into the weeds with that. But effectively, yes, you could use smaller pixels, but everything pixel-wise comes down to if the telescope can even resolve it with those pixels. But so you can put a small sensor on any optic that you want, but if that density is too dense, you might not get sharp stars. If it's too wide, you might not get, there's a balance in there. And when it comes to astrophotography, you're trying to match the pixels to your local seeing. Now, most average backyard seeing, I would say, is between 1 arc second to 2 arc seconds. Now, you could take a little tiny camera and shove that on the back of a telescope, and you'd get this really, really crazy, let's just do 840, 120. So usually when you're trying to match a camera to a telescope, you want to aim probably about 1 to 1.5 arc seconds per pixel is the resolution you're trying to aim for to get the sharpest images possible on average. So I've got an Esprit 120 spec plugged in the calculator here. We're talking about a full frame. So a full frame camera that has 3.76 micron pixels, that's a 455 sensor, more effectively well known as the ZWO 6200 or the QHY 600. We're shooting at 840 millimeters with those pixels. At 1x1 bin, we're at 0.92 arc seconds per pixel. Not bad. That's pretty close to the target. That should work. If the seeing isn't great, then you're going to end up just binning it and going up to 1.85 arc seconds per pixel. Now we could go to something smaller. I'm not sure what has a 2.9 micron pixel. Let me just... 585, which is tiny. A 585, which has... That's going to be 1. 585 is going to be 0.7 arc seconds per pixel. So if that's the case, I always flip this around. Let me look this up. There's terms. There's undersampling and oversampling. And I always mix these up. Because if you're undersampling something, there we go. If you're undersampling, it means all your stars are going to look blocky. If you're oversampling, then your stars tend to look soft. So I should know this better, but yeah, we did a whole episode on this, actually. Yeah, we went into the math and all of this. We'll have to find it, but yeah. So whether you're cropping in and you've got more pixel density, if it doesn't match up with the resolution for your local site in the telescope, it's completely irrelevant because your images are either going to look really soft, which I guess you could just press blur exterminator and poof, it disappears, or they're going to be really blocky. So it doesn't really matter for the image circle, particularly in astrophotography. Now, daytime photography and you're dealing with pixel density, sure, you might be able to get away with a little bit more and you get more of that zoom factor put into it because there's so much light and the exposures are so quick that pixel density should help you out. But in astrophotography, with telescopes, it all comes down to your arc second per pixel and making that work for you. So you want to find your pixel size and match it to the optics to get the best, sharpest images that you can. But we have a whole episode we went through that. So sorry if that didn't quite handle the question accurately, but that's kind of the name of the game. I'm sure someone will debate on that, and that's fine. So, all right, image circles. So I found just a handful of common image circles and common cameras. Now, obviously, every telescope is going to be different, but I tried to give a small collection of what we are working with. All of this is actually to scale as well. So the image circles to the sensor size is to scale. Obviously, in real life, it might be a little bit different. So we're going to start here with our smallest image circles and go to the larger ones. And I've actually put the sensor sizes on there as well. So let's start with like 16 millimeter. Now 16 millimeter is relatively small, but this is something that you're starting to see on like the HAC 125DX is 16 millimeters. Celestron advertises the RASA 6 at 16 millimeters with a usable 22 millimeter field. But we'll talk about that here in a minute. So here is a 585 sensor and a 16 millimeter image circle. You can see how nicely the little rectangle sits within inside that circle. And that's really what you're looking for when you're trying to figure out your camera and image circle together. So you can see you don't want it to approach the edge or exceed the edge of the circle because then you start to get some aberrations, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Some telescopes handle aberrations better than others. It also comes down to the f-stop and how fast the optics actually are that can make things more severe. Question. Planetary. So it says, or planetary smaller image circle doesn't matter because you typically use small sensors. Yeah, so planetary imaging, you're not really too concerned about the image circle because you're generally using very high resolution, very small sensors where you're shooting right in the middle of the image circle. A lot of the telescopes, like if you're using most of the friends I've got who do planetary imaging on a serious level are using C14s. Those have a very decent size image circle on the back, usually like 43, 44 millimeters. The chip is very, very tiny. So image circles are kind of irrelevant when it comes to planetary imaging because the chips are so tiny. So, and the whole matching your pixels thing completely changes because you're shooting really, really quickly. Anyway, back to the image circles. So here's 16 millimeters with the very popular 585 sensor, regardless of the manufacturer. Now, if we step up, we then apply the 533. And you can see the 533 is starting to push the limits of the 16 millimeter image circles. The corners of the sensor are starting to near the physical edge of that circle. Now, what happens when that occurs? Your image probably looks like this. You get vignetting. Now, there are ways to address vignetting, but as you approach the edge of that image circle, your illuminated field, light starts to get cut off because all that's coming through as a circle and you have a square or rectangular sensor. So that's why we have this circular approach, because that's our light cone. And you can still see some detail out on the outer edge there. It's just starting to get clipped a little bit because of that circle being your limiter. So how do we address that is you can take a flat frame, which then corrects for the vignetting there, which is very, very common with a lot of the telescopes on the market nowadays. Most of us take flats. Now, flat frames don't just get rid of vignetting. They also get rid of other little like dust motes and other aberrations that are caused by particles on or near the focus point. But vignetting is one of the big things that it helps with. Now, if you exceed your image circle and it's starting to clip, like just black, like you can see from this one, you can still see there are stars visible in the vignetted area. You're still getting starlight there, and a flat will take care of that, like this frame. But if your camera exceeds the image circle, it's just black, no flat frame is going to correct it because it's actually clipping the light cone as it comes in. So there's a flat frame. Now, another thing that will happen is sometimes, and this can be more common on faster telescopes, sometimes you'll take a picture like this, and obviously there's no flat applied to that. You can see the vignetting. The telescope that this was shot on has a relatively small image circle, but we were testing with a larger sensor. So you can see that it works, and the flat would probably correct for this. But another issue that can occur is that the star images in the corner are not going to look as nice. You can see here on the edge, the stars are getting smeared a bit because the correctors on the telescope are not able to handle correcting that field. So that's another reason why you might want to stay within the recommended image circle. It's not just about illumination, it's also about best star images. And you can get some funky things going on if your camera sensor is exceeding the image circle beyond vignetting. And I guess you could use Blur Exterminator or whatever tools are on the market nowadays to do that. But you can get some really weird star images if you're not staying within the recommended specifications for that particular optic. So those are two major things that will happen if your sensor is not correctly sized to the listed circle. Now, going up in size, you'll get the 28 millimeter image circle. This is really common with like our Quattro coma correctors and some other telescopes on the market. Some things like 33, 28, all kinds of stuff there. But there's a larger image circle, and you can see that these small sensors, the 585 and 533, are now well illuminated inside of that 28 millimeter image circle. They don't have that clipping issue that you would see on the smaller image circle. And now here, because these are such small sensors, you could probably get away without needing flats. I always recommend taking flats, but it's so well centered, much like a planetary camera like we talked about earlier. It's so well centered and so well illuminated from the larger circle that vignetting probably will not be a problem for these sensors on that large of a circle. Now, if we were to add a very popular 294, which is a 4/3 sensor, you can see that also fits very nicely inside of a 28 millimeter image circle. So that could easily do it. So a 294 would be very happy inside of the 28 millimeter image circle. Now, of course, bigger sensors are something that many of us want. We want a larger field of view. You want more real estate on your image without having to go buy another big fancy telescope or switch things up. You want to usually get as much performance out of your telescope as possible, and a lot of us like to get a big chunk of the sky. So that's where these larger and larger sensors start to come into play. Now, for the smaller stuff, you can see a lot of telescopes easily have an image circle of around 33 or 28 millimeters that could easily handle many of these popular sensors like the 585, 533, and 294. Well, now we start to get to the bigger ones like the 571 That is an APS-C size sensor. This would be the same as using most of the mirrorless and DSLR cameras on the market. This is the ZWO 2600's sensor, but I forgot all the other names from every other manufacturer, but the sensor is a 571. It's a APS-C crop style sensor. This is very common size sensor in a Canon Rebels, the smaller R cameras, the mirrorless camera. Many mirrorless, budget-friendly mirrorless cameras use this size sensor. And you can see with a APS-C sensor, we're starting to have issues with the 28 millimeter. It should be okay, but you are going to notice the vignetting will be much more apparent. You should be okay on the star images. It just depends on the telescope itself and how everything works out. But you'll notice there that you are going to have vignetting, and flats are going to have to come in to take care of that. The next step up would then move up to 43 millimeter. This is where we start talking to full frame sensors. Our Esprit 120 and 150s are 43 millimeter image circles. I think the larger Edge HDs, the 9 1/4, 11, and 14 from Celestron, I believe, are also 43 millimeter. Maybe they're a little bit bigger on the 14. I'm not sure. I don't know off the top of my head. But you can see now at 43 millimeters, your 571 chip is easily handled. Now, what's nice is with the image circles there's space around there. So you can see right here, there's a lot of space. Even if we go back a bit, you'll see there's these big open spots above and below where your sensor would be. That means you would have room to maybe illuminate a guider, like the 2600 Duo that's got the guide camera in there. Your image circle can also accommodate other accessories, such as off-axis guiders, the little pick-off prisms, and on-axis guiders that also need to be illuminated there. So a larger image circle will be able to handle those additional accessories because you have extra light going through there. That usually is best done once you reach about that 28 millimeter or larger image circle. Then you've got room to start adding some of those extra accessories. 43 millimeter, now we're getting to the world of full frame. So a 43 millimeter image circle, you can see for like a 571, you've got plenty of real estate to work with. The chip is well illuminated. You've got plenty of room to handle either an on-axis guider or an OAG pickoff mirror. You're good to go. But then we start getting to the big chips. So if we add a full frame sensor, here's where the 455 comes into play. This is the ZWO 2600 and QHY 600s modern cameras, but the like STL 11,000s and stuff like that. That one needs a larger image circle. So 43 millimeters is usually where you want to be at minimum to handle a full frame sensor. That's usually what most camera lenses are also. They're able to produce an image circle about that size. What was the image circle of the blanket scope? 43 millimeter ballpark, full frame. So if you're going into full frame, you want to find a scope with about a 40 millimeter image circle minimum, ideally 43 or larger, if you can handle that. And that's where things start to get a little bit more difficult, and budget starts to go out the door a little bit, which if you've got a full frame camera and a bunch of filters, you knew budget wasn't going to be a big deal either. But full frame really starts to ask a lot from a telescope or even a lens. That's a very large flat piece. That's a very large flat sensor that we're having to deal with there. And these sensors have very, very tiny pixels. So they need to be able to handle these itty bitty tiny pixels and give you really nice sharp images. And that's where we are today. You have a lot of people who are wanting telescopes at affordable prices that can deal with sensors this big. So, are there any new sensors coming up to replace the 585 or 533? I don't know. I have no visibility to what Sony and other camera sensor manufacturers are making. The 585 is really new, so I don't see anything replacing that anytime soon. The 533 is really kind of a bulletproof sensor, but I don't know. I would like to see more square, larger sensors that are square. I prefer square sensors rather than rectangular ones. So that's one thing I really like about 533s is they've got the little square sensor in there. Also, the no longer made Kodak 16803, which was a humongous sensor, was also square, but I'm not sure. I am sure something will come, but I'm not aware. I don't stay up on the camera sensors that much. So there, we've got 16, 48, 43. Now let's get to the big toys. Plane wave. These really big CDK telescopes, they're delta rows, stuff like that. Most of them, I looked it up yesterday, are 52 millimeter image circles, which is really ideal for full frame cameras. With a 52 millimeter image circle, you've got tons of room to put all kinds of stuff on there. And I believe this is done on purpose. Because usually on these larger Cassegrain telescopes, you need to be using an off-axis guider or on-axis guiding to get the best images possible out of them. Now, you need that large image circle not only to handle bigger sensors if you want to, but now you really need to start considering how you're going to manage these additional accessories that need to fit within the light path. So you've got a big sensor that you're working with, but you also need to make sure that your guider is getting enough illumination, because anybody who's done anything with an OAG or an on-axis guider knows how much of a pain it is to find a guide star. So the image circle also needs to be able to accommodate the little guide chip that's in there as well, especially when it's on a rotator, so you have to have room around it. So if you've got one of these big scopes that have a 52 millimeter image circle, you can have your big full frame sensor, maybe even a little bit bigger than that, and you can have your whole guide set up, and it easily fits with inside that image circle and really reduces the amount of vignetting that you're going to be getting. So these big scopes have the ability to handle larger image circles. But with technology, sensors keep coming out more and more. And now we have the IMX 461, which is out under ZWO as well as some other ones. That is the medium format sensors that are starting to come out. They've been really popular in like the Hasselblads and Fuji cameras. These are big 100 megapixel sensors. They're huge, which is great if you have a telescope that can handle that. The problem is these sensors are very, very expensive. The cameras are very expensive. The filters are very expensive. And on top of that, you're very limited on what telescopes can handle a monster of a sensor this size. Now, the best one I could find is the Takahashi FSQ 106 EDX series. That has a monster 88 millimeter image circle. That was designed back in the day to handle medium format film. When you had these big hunkin' bodies and these big film frames that you had to shoot with. So some of the older astrophysics refractors, some of the older Takahashis, Pentax, in a way they were kind of ahead of the game because they were designed to handle absolutely ginormous pieces of film. And that really hasn't been too much of a problem because it's taken a long time for digital sensors to become large enough to meet that same criteria. And we're getting there right now, but they're still quite expensive. To to have these sensors. So the 461, and there's another one that's out there as well. These are the medium format chips that are becoming more abundant. The nice thing is it gives you a humongous field of view, but now you need to have a telescope that can deal with it. So, but there's not many out there. So, is there any way to calculate the image circle if the manual doesn't specify it? I'm sure there is. I'd have to look it up. I think the best way to do it is you'd have to like set the lens or whatever is up and in a dark room and point it out a window and let it project the image onto the wall. And when it's in focus, and you have to do this, if it's an astrophotography telescope, you have to do it with the reducer or the corrector that's going to be used, because the reducer or the corrector is the one that dictates that image circle. So wherever that comes to focus, you want to get that nice and sharp. That's usually what the image circle is. But if you don't know, I would recommend contacting the manufacturer directly and asking them. They should be able to tell you more about it. So if they don't, then that's a bit of a problem. So now, speaking of focal reducers, here's a little section on focal reducers. Focal reducers are going to change things. If you don't know what a focal reducer is, this is a focal reducer. It's an additional optic that usually threads on the back of the telescope somewhere. It's got a couple lenses, maybe a few lenses in there, depending on how elaborate and how much reduction the reducer is going to give you. And every reducer is different. So you need to check again with the manufacturer on what that actually is going to produce and the reduction factor. The more severe the reduction factor, or the faster that is, the smaller the image circle is going to be. So now reducers are going to do a few things for you. They're going to produce a wider field of view, and they're going to be able to reduce the exposure time because they're shortening the F ratio of the telescope, speeding it up. So you get some advantages to that. Now, reducers generally mount onto the focuser, and at times they'll actually go up into the focuser or into the light path, and they catch it earlier and then focus it faster to the focus point. And when it does that, you're shrinking the image circle. So it takes the light cone from the existing telescope and then bends it quickly at the end there. So that way you're able to get a wider field of view, but that comes with a compromise. But you're going to have to check this. If you're getting a focal reducer for your telescope, you want to make sure that you know the image circle of the focal reducer, not the telescope with the flattener. It's going to change. So we'll have our telescope here. We've got our objective lens and we've got our flattener. Now, usually you put the flattener on the back. A flattener generally keeps the light path the same natively to whatever the telescope is. So they don't reduce at all. It's just a 1x. So whatever is listed on the telescope is usually what a field flattener should keep it there. So we focus the light, it goes with the flattener, and the flattener is usually what dictates whatever the image circle is going to be, the usable image circle for taking images. So on an Esprit with our flattener, it's 43 millimeters on the 120 and the 150. It's great for full frame, huzzah. Now, let's say I have a smaller sensor and I want to get a bigger field of view, or I want to speed things up. I would put my focal reducer in there. Focal reducer sits further up in the light path, grabs the cone, focuses it, but because it has to restrict that cone a lot faster, it shrinks the image circle down. So it's harder to utilize the big sensors on focal reducers unless the native telescope already has a large image circle to begin with. Reducers will always shrink the image circle. It's just part of the compromise. But the advantage is, let's say we're shooting with a full frame camera natively. Let's say you want to get a wider field of view. Your camera can handle the focal reducer, but you don't want to go out and buy some big old sensor. You can buy a focal reducer, and your smaller sensor now becomes close or maybe matches up nicely to what the full frame could do. So the yellow is our full frame, and the green is our crop sensor with the focal reducer. Yellow is native, green is with the focal reducer installed. So focal reducers can be helpful if you have smaller sensors and you don't want to go out and buy a whole nother telescope. It speeds up your exposure time and image acquisition time. It still flattens the field of view, but the focal reducer might not match well if you have one of these big full frame sensors. You need to check with the manufacturer to see if the reducer will handle it. If not, it's great for those who have smaller sensors but want a bigger field of view without dumping thousands and thousands of dollars on a big format chip. Some questions in here. What happened with the last year's totem images? Are you going to publish the winning images? We published the winning images in our, was it February? What's up webcast? What's up for the month? I think is when we did that. We announced all the winners and we published their images there. I suppose we could look at publishing them on the website. We'll have to talk about that, but we have them on file. So, what's your favorite telescope camera combo and what targets do you like? I like going after really dark, nitty gritty nebulas. I really like these 3.76 micron pixel cameras, like a 533, the 571s, the 455 sensors. They're all the same, just bigger. At 1,000 millimeters, 800 to 1,000 millimeters, it's a really nice matched combo. But wide field stuff is really nice too. I just really like matching the sensor pixels up to the focal length to get really nice, sharp images. I don't know if that really answers it. Doesn't the reducer make it wider? Yes, focal reducers can make it wider. That's what you're seeing here. So the yellow frame is a full frame sensor with no reducer at about 1,000 millimeters. The green is a crop sensor, a ZW 2600, with the focal reducer on the same scope. So it effectively makes the field of view wider for the smaller chip. So you have a 585 on a Takahashi 106. Yeah, that would be really good. It's a good match for that. And that's something that you can do. If the pixels match up, if you have a smaller sensor, that's something you can do. You're taking advantage of that pixel density, where as long as the resolution of your camera matches up with the focal length of the telescope, you're okay. So let's say you do have one of these wide field refractors like the Takahashi 106 or an Esprit 100, something that's like 500-600 millimeter focal length, and you want to shoot galaxies, you can get a tiny chip and you could put it on the back of that telescope and it frames these up really nicely, and the pixel size can match because it's a short focal length. As long as you're trying to hit that 1 to 1.5 arc second per pixel range, you're pretty good. It's just matching them up. So there are at times where you can take advantage of the smaller sensors. A smaller sensor that matches well on a shorter focal length can still be a really effective high resolution imaging setup on small targets. But it all comes down to that pixel match rather than the image circle. So, but a 585 on the back of a TAC 106 is kind of hysterical because it's this itty bitty little chip on this huge image circle. So, but yeah, so a focal reducer is basically just a more cost-effective way to get a wider field of view when using a smaller sensor. Now, some of the really high-end stuff, like the Takahashi 106 and some of the big Takahashis, they have these really elaborate, very expensive focal reducers that can handle these big sensors. But you pay up the nose for those things. The issue really stems when you've got these big full frame sensors. That's when that becomes a problem. It's hard to make a reducer that handles full frame because the light path is already getting smaller. So in order to be able to have a big image circle on a reducer, you need to have an even larger image circle on the native scope. It's all compromises. So, I want a wider field of view and I want to speed things up. Great. The compromise is the image circle shrinks. So some considerations. An image circle is just your framework. It just something that you work within. But the bottlenecks of this are your filters. Filters can cause vignetting, especially if you're using a very steep, a scope with a steep light cone like a Rasa or Hyperstar or something that's really fast. You want to make sure the filters are large enough to fit the light cone, but don't clip it. That's not as big of a deal when you're doing like F4 or slower. You should be okay at that point, but you want it to all fit within the light cone. So filters can cause that. If you're using too small a filter, you could clip it. That's why you generally want to go larger to illuminate that. What size are you using? Off-axis guiders or built-in guiders need to be able to fit within the image circle so you can effectively guide with them. So that is an issue I've run into with the ZWO 2600 Duo, and it's not any manufacturing issue. It's you have to remember that when you buy this chip with this camera, that yes, the chip is smaller and it would fit within the smaller image circle, but you need a bigger circle than you're going to think you need to illuminate the guider as well. You need to take that into consideration. So make sure that your image circle can handle not just the chip, but the guider, as well as other accessories that you're going to put in there. You just want to make sure everything works as a unit. But image circles will ultimately dictate what you're able to do. So just keep an eye on that. We just don't want you clipping the light path and getting some weird aberrations. So in short, if you're getting a new system, if you're getting a new scope, pay attention to the circle. Make sure it handles whatever camera you're using or whatever camera you're planning on upgrading to. I would recommend getting something that's bigger than what you need at the moment, because we all know we like to upgrade stuff in the future. So take into consideration what you're going to need later down the road so you're not having to buy it over. But yeah, that's image circles. So I hope that was really helpful for you guys. Just pay attention to the specs. If you don't know the specs, reach out to the manufacturer. A lot of us are here to help you. We have support teams that will help you. We do it all the time here. So yeah, we're here to assist. Next week, we're talking about choosing a refractor for visual. So that should be a fun one. We're trying to balance out some more visual stuff in here. So we'll be talking refractors and what to look for there when you're thinking about visual observations. There's a lot to consider. So we'll be talking about that next week. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like on a video. Let us know we're doing a good job. You can always head over to skywatcher.threadless.com to pick up any cool swag and support the channel. Of course, you could always go buy a telescope, which supports us as well. But we all appreciate you watching and hanging out with us. I hope you have a good weekend. And then we will be back next week for talking about refractors. So awesome. Well, thank you guys very much. I don't see any more questions in the chat. We will see you guys next Friday for another episode of the What's Up Webcast. Clear skies, everyone. Have a good weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week.